Previously on a very special Forgotten Realms Explained.
Hey, fellow Netheril citizen, want to learn magic? Boy, do I! Wait, so you're not calling yourself a wizard anymore?
No, I'm an arcanist.
I know, let's build some giant magical batteries and then power some quasi-magical items with them.
Sounds great!
You can't cut off the top of a mountain and create a floating city. Holy crap, you just cut off the top of a mountain and created a floating city. Are you freaking kidding me? What's this? A stolen treasure map?
And now, the conclusion.
Hello everybody, Jordan here, the PH is silent. Today we continue our story of magic with the final chapters of the Netherese Empire. Spoilers, it's a fallen empire, so yes, it fell. And we left off with the Netherese learning to harness the power of their magic batteries called the mythallar, which I realize I'm now saying weird. Mythallar, there, that's better. The mythallar, which allowed them to levitate mountains and charge magical weapons and armor with a field around it. Now, the moment the first floating city ascended into the sky and started wandering across Faerun, Netheril was divided into two countries, subtly named High and Low Netheril. Now, High Netheril was the floating cities, and Low Netheril was the remaining land below. High Netheril was royalty and the most magic of magic humans. Low Netheril encompassed the lesser arcanist, towns of people, and the remaining barbarian tribes that roamed the northern and southwestern plains. So at this time period, the Netherese were pushing the boundaries of magic. They were crossing into other planes, creating new spells and magical items, even to the point of going into other crystal spheres, which I mentioned earlier in another video. That is part of the Spelljammer setting, leaving the sphere that holds Terrell and exploring other universes, other worlds entirely. They were the first to make contact with the Illithids, but soon deemed that travel to other worlds was dangerous and unprofitable, so they refocused on Faerun instead. You know, the more I read Spelljammer stuff, I really want to run a fantasy Star Trek game exploring planets. Maybe someday. The lifting of mountains and all of this magical research took its toll on the Weave, and soon some creatures known as the Faerun noticed. And the Faerun lived in the Underdark beneath the land of Netheril. They're really an odd-looking race of sorcerers. They resemble upright cones with a barbed stinger tail and like an odd mouth full of teeth. Now, the Faerun are ambitious and malicious neutral evil creatures that worked only for their own individual causes. They delight in bringing pain to others and would gladly erase all other beings from existence if they had the choice. Unfortunately, they also like having slaves, so it's a hard conflict with them. Now, unbeknownst to the Netherese, all their magical usage was destroying the underground home of the Faerun. So in retaliation, the Faerun developed a spell that drained the life from the Netherese lands, which then transformed Low Netheril into the desert of Anorak. This was a slow process, and the Netherese didn't look too much into it at first, simply flying their city to another area to then grow crops there. But as the plague followed their floating city, they soon realized that there was a malicious force at work. The dead lands underneath the floating city caused the Netherese difficulty in feeding their people, and the enemy finally showed itself when the Faerun developed spells to bring down several floating cities. Now, the Netherese fought back, but over the course of many years, the Faerun destroyed most of the vegetation in Netheril and turned the land into a great desert, scattering the people who lived there. Eventually, the Netherese turned to using the Sharn to combat the Faerun, which worked surprisingly well, shifting the battle to more equal footing. Next, we're going to discuss Karsus. Karsus was born in -696 DR and will become known as the greatest arch-wizard of Netheril. He was able to cast his first spell at age 2, and by age 22, he became the youngest arcanist to create a floating city. He pushed all magical boundaries because magic came so easy for him. He was often credited with having the power but not the discipline behind it. He created a school for magic in his floating city that encouraged new radical thinking and taboo projects. Now, at this school, they discovered and explored the Shadow Plane, which at this time was a plane of existence that coexisted with the Prime Material Plane. It's not the Shadowfell. Shar manipulates the Plane of Shadow later on to create the Shadowfell, but But Karsus and his followers studied it and found an infinite source of shadow creatures for slave labor, as well as a dumping ground for unwanted garbage. In negative 339 DR, Karsus cast a spell that he had been working on for years. His goal was to gain enough power to destroy the Farum. He truly felt that Netheril's future rested on his shoulders. With the war with the Farum and just how powerful he was, he wanted to fix it all. The spell was called Karsus's Avatar, and it would steal the power of a deity and transfer it to the caster. Now, Karsus cast this spell with Mistral in mind, as he thought she was the most powerful deity and the most appropriate for his purposes. This event of him casting the spell became known as Karsus's Folly. The second after casting the spell, Karsus, his body swelled with godly power and his mind was filled with unimaginable knowledge. And with that knowledge, he realized that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Stealing that much power from Mistral hurt the weave greatly. All magical effects were doubled for a short time, and ultimately the weave was going to be destroyed. So in an effort to save the weave, Mistral sacrificed herself into the weave to rebuild it. Doing that broke the link with Karsus, turning him to stone, and also caused all magic everywhere to cease functioning. Instantly, all the Netherese floating cities came crashing to the ground, killing their inhabitants. Mistral was then reincarnated as Mistra, and her first priority was to recreate the weave. In recreating the weave, she established new rules of magic so that no spell above 10th level would ever function. Mistra was able to save 3 of Netheril's floating cities. Uriah, Azram, and Holondath were high enough above the ground to survive the long fall before Mistra was able to recreate magic. The 4th city to survive was Thultanthar, which was pulled into the plane of shadow for protection. Now, priests and priestesses of the new goddess of magic were told the story of Karsus in dreams and visions when they prayed for spells. It was Mistra's attempt to make sure that nothing like this would ever happen again. Within a few short months, the inhabitants of the surviving 3 cities left, fearful of the Farum, the gods, and the orcs, and about 1/3 migrated northward, with the rest traveling south to create homes for the surviving floating cities. It was the beginning of the end, and within 300 years, the Netherese were gone from history altogether, reabsorbed into other cultures, and just kind of vanished, leaving behind quasi-magical relics. I really like this story, and I hope that you guys can use it in some dungeon that you run your players through. Perhaps this dungeon is a fallen Netheril city, where you walk on the walls because it fell on its side, and traps would be hilarious if a pit opens up sideways, giving clues to the players as to what might have actually happened. Like, why is this whole ruined city on its side? Or maybe they run into the stone body of Karsus himself. I mean, that is the fun of Forgotten Realms, is once you have this bit of history, you can mold it and shape it into your game, which is exactly what Wizards of the Coast wants you to do. And honestly, another reason that I started making these videos, so that players and DMs can have that background setting to influence their games. Well, that's it for today. Please like, subscribe, tweet, and share with a friend. Every little bit helps. And thank you again for watching, everybody. I wish you a fantastic day.